The pastor's voice fills the church. If anyone here has a reason why this man and this woman should not be joined together, speak now or forever hold your peace. Silence. Ogechi is glowing in white lace, hands trembling in Kelechi's grip, 3 seconds away from becoming her wife. Then the back doors slam open. A barefoot little girl, no older than 7, sprints down the aisle past 300 stunned guests. She dodges the flower girl, she dodges an usher who tries to grab her. She does not stop until she reaches the altar, until she is standing right beside the bride, chest heaving, eyes wet. She grabs a fistful of Ogechi's wedding dress. She looks up at her, and she whispers 5 words that stop the wedding cold. Please don't marry my daddy. The organ music dies. Somebody's phone hits the marble floor. Kelechi's face goes the color of ash. And Ogechi, the bride, the woman who planned every second of this day down to the ribbon on the chairs, stands frozen at the altar, staring down at a child she has never seen in her life, asking herself one terrifying question. Who is this little girl? And why does she look exactly like the man standing next to her? Before we go further, if you love stories that don't let you breathe until the very last second, hit subscribe now because this one is going to twist more times than you think. Now let's rewind, back to where all of this actually began. Lagos had been loud with wedding talk for weeks. Everyone in Ogechi's circle knew her story. She was 29, an event planner who had spent her 20s building her own small company from nothing. One wedding, one birthday party, one naming ceremony at a time. She grew up in Enugu, raised by a widowed mother, Mama Grace, who sold fabric in Ogbete market and prayed over every naira that came into the house. Ogechi knew what it meant to want something badly and build it with her own 2 hands. That was who she was. Careful, observant, not the kind of woman who missed things. Which is exactly why what happened later made no sense to anyone who truly knew her. Kelechi or Beulah was different from anyone she had dated before. Old money, or at least money that had been sitting comfortably for 2 generations, spread across property in Lagos, Abuja, and Port Harcourt. He ran the family's real estate arm, closed deals with a smile that made grown men nervous, and still called Ogechi every single night just to ask how her day went. He was 34, composed, the kind of man who never seemed to raise his voice, not once in the 8 months they'd been together. They met at a corporate gala Ogechi had been hired to coordinate. He complimented the flower arrangements. She joked that flowers were the easy part of her job, people were the hard part. 6 weeks later, he proposed in front of the same flowers because he wanted the moment to complete itself. He drove all the way to Enugu to meet Mama Grace instead of flying, helped carry sacks of fabric into her storeroom without being asked, and earned an endorsement Mama Grace, who did not impress easily, rarely gave. That one has been raised well, she told Ogechi afterward, whatever his family's money has done to him. It was by every account a fairy tale, except fairy tales don't usually come with a mother-in-law like Beatrice or Beulah. From the very first meeting, something about Beatrice unsettled Ogechi. It wasn't loud. It wasn't rude, not exactly. It was in the way Beatrice's eyes moved over Ogechi's shoes before her face. It was in the way she asked in front of 5 relatives on Sunday lunch, "And your father, what did he do again before he passed?" Knowing full well Ogechi's father had died when she was 9, knowing full well it was a wound, and asking anyway, smiling the whole time. It was in the way Beatrice always found a reason to remind Ogechi that this family did things a certain way, that weddings in this family were not small, that reputation mattered more than romance, that Kelechi had responsibilities beyond just being a husband, responsibilities Ogechi wouldn't fully understand yet. there was another moment Ogechi tried hard to forget. Beatrice had once paused in front of an old portrait in the mansion hallway, an unnamed young woman nobody had ever introduced, and said, almost to herself, "Some people simply understand when a family outgrows them." She'd moved on so quickly, Ogechi almost convinced herself she'd imagined the strangeness of it. Almost. Ogechi mentioned both moments to her best friend in Kem over jollof rice and too much wine. "She looks at me like a stain on my son's shirt," she said, "like she's just waiting for the dry cleaner to fix it. And there's a portrait in that house in Kem of a woman nobody has a name for. Beatrice looked at it like it owed her something." Nkem, who never sugarcoated anything, set her glass down slowly. Some mothers don't want a daughter-in-law. They want a smaller version of themselves to control. Watch her, Oge. Women like that don't fight you with fists. They fight you with silence and secrets. And by the time you notice the war, you are already losing it. "You are being dramatic," Ogechi said. "Maybe. Or maybe I've just met enough Beatrices to know the type before they finish introducing themselves." Ogechi laughed it off that night. She wishes she hadn't. The wedding planning moved fast after the engagement, faster than Ogechi wanted, but Beatrice insisted. "Long engagements invite gossip," she said. "People start asking why the man is stalling." Kelechi, for his part, went along with whatever pace his mother set, which Ogechi found strange for a man who otherwise made every decision in his life with total independence. When it came to Beatrice, something in him softened into obedience. She noticed it. She filed it away. She didn't yet understand what it meant. Then the first strange thing happened. 10 days before the wedding, a bouquet arrived at Ogechi's office. No card, no name, just white lilies, the kind used at funerals, not weddings. Tucked inside the ribbon was a small folded paper. Ogechi opened it, expecting a florist's mistake, a wrong delivery. Instead, in handwriting she didn't recognize, it read, "Ask him about Ijeoma before it's too late." She stared at the note for a long time. She showed it to Nkem, who immediately said, "Someone's trying to scare you. Some jealous ex, some hater. Lagos women can be wicked, okay? Burn it and move on." Ogechi wanted to believe that. She really did. But the name sat in her chest like a stone she couldn't swallow or spit out. Ijeoma. She had never heard Kelechi mention anyone by that name. Not once, in 8 months, not in any of the late-night conversations where he told her about his childhood, his failed first business, his fear of his own father's temper growing up. Ijeoma had never come up. And somehow, that silence felt louder than if he'd mentioned her 100 times. That same evening, her phone rang from a number she didn't recognize. She answered on the second ring. There was breathing on the other end, unsteady, like someone gathering courage and losing it over and over. "Hello, who is calling?" A woman's voice, barely audible, whispered, "Don't marry him yet," and the line went dead. She called back immediately. It rang out, then told her the number no longer existed. She almost asked him that night. She had the words ready on her tongue when he called her, exhausted from his site inspection, laughing about something his driver said. She listened to him laugh and told herself she was being paranoid. She told herself that a marriage built on interrogating anonymous notes was no marriage at all. She let it go. She shouldn't have. 4 days later, at her final dress fitting, Ogechi noticed a woman standing across the street from the boutique. Not shopping, not walking anywhere, just standing, watching the boutique's glass windows, watching Ogechi specifically for nearly 20 minutes. She wore a plain green wrapper, a scarf pulled low over her forehead, and she held the hand of a small girl who kept trying to tug her forward toward the boutique while the woman kept holding her back. When Ogechi stepped outside to look closer, the woman turned and walked away fast, nearly dragging the child with her. Ogechi called out, but they disappeared into the market crowd within seconds. She told Nkem again. This time, Nkem didn't laugh it off. "Oge," she said slowly, "I think somebody is trying to tell you something, and they are too scared to say it directly." That night, unable to hold it in any longer, Ogechi did ask him. Not directly, not with the note or the phone call laid out on the table between them, but carefully, testing the water. They were lying in bed, the television murmuring low in the background, and she said, as casually as she could manage, "Kelechi, have you ever loved anyone before me? Like really loved them?" He was quiet for a moment too long. "There was someone back in university. It didn't work out actually. She left for someone else, I was told. Moved abroad. Old story. I don't really like talking about it." "What was her name?" Ogechi asked, heart pounding, already suspecting the answer. "Why does that matter now?" he said, with a small laugh that didn't quite reach his eyes, and pulled her closer instead of answering, kissing her forehead in a way that felt less like affection and more like a door quietly closing. Ogechi let it go that night, but she filed away one very important detail. He had just told her Ijoma left the country years ago, and the woman standing outside the boutique with the green wrapper and a small girl's hand in hers had looked like she'd never left Nigeria at all. That was the moment Ogechi decided to stop waiting for the truth to come to her and start looking for it herself. She started small. She asked Kelechi's longtime friend and best man, Emeka, casual questions over drinks, framed as innocent curiosity about young Kelechi, the wild years before Ogechi knew him. Emeka was warm, funny, always ready with a story, except every time the questions drifted toward Kelechi's young 20s, toward the years before he took over the family business. Emeka's easy smile would tighten just slightly, and he'd change the subject with practiced smoothness. "What about university?" Ogechi pushed gently. "Surely there were girlfriends before me?" Emeka's fingers tapped once against his glass, a small, involuntary tell. "Every man has a past," he said, laughing too quickly. "Nothing worth digging up. Kelechi is a different man now, no?" For 1 second, something shifted behind his eyes, like a man standing at the edge of a confession, weighing what he owed his oldest friend against what he owed the woman about to marry him. Then he waved for the bartender. "Another round? Weddings make everybody too serious." He never brought it up again, but Ogechi noticed his usually constant stream of jokes in the family WhatsApp group had gone strangely quiet in the days that followed. A man who talks that much and still says nothing, she thought, is hiding something on someone else's orders. She tried the family's old housekeeper next, a soft-spoken elderly woman named Iyaronke, who had worked for the Obioras for over 20 years and had recently retired to a small flat in Mushi. Ogechi visited under the pretense of delivering wedding invitation samples, since Iyaronke had practically raised Kelechi and deserved to see them first. The old woman welcomed her warmly, made her tea, admired the invitation card. And then Ogechi, gently, almost by accident, mentioned the name. "Do you know anyone called Ijoma? Someone from the family's past, maybe?" Iyaronke's hands, which had been steady the entire visit, suddenly stopped moving. She set her teacup down very carefully, like it had become fragile in the last 3 seconds. She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. "Who sent you that name?" "Nobody sent it to me. I found it. Why? Who is she?" Iyaronke looked toward her own front door as if the walls themselves might report back to Beatrice. "Some things are buried for a reason, my dear. Buried things stay buried because digging them up destroys more than it fixes." "Please," Ogechi said, and something in her voice must have carried real fear, real desperation, because Iyaronke's guarded face finally cracked just slightly. "I cannot tell you everything," the old woman said. "I made a promise a long time ago, and I am an old woman who still believes promises matter. But I will tell you this much. Before this big wedding, before any of this, there was a girl. A good girl. Poor, like the way you are poor, my dear.
Don't think I haven't noticed the similarities. Kelechi loved her, truly loved her, the way young men love before life teaches them to calculate. And one day, she was simply gone. No goodbye, no explanation. The family said she left him for another man abroad. That was the story everyone was told to believe. You don't believe it, Ogechi said. It wasn't a question. Iaronke's eyes filled with something that looked very much like guilt. I believe, she said slowly, that some mothers protect their sons the way lionesses protect their cubs, even from the son's own heart, even from the truth. Were you there? Ogechi asked gently. Iaronke's hands trembled around her teacup. I drove her to the motor park myself, she admitted. Madame gave me an envelope and told me to see the girl onto a bus out of Enugu and never look back. I did not know she was carrying a child, I swear it. Every time I light a candle in church, I ask God to forgive me for the part I played, small as it was. You are following someone else's orders, Ogechi said gently. That is what we always tell ourselves, Iaronke said, wiping her eyes with the edge of her wrapper. There is always a moment a person can refuse. I did not refuse. She would say no more, no matter how Ogechi pressed. She simply held Ogechi's hand at the door and said, whatever you find, my dear, remember that the child is never the villain in these stories, never. Whatever happens, protect the child. Ogechi left that flat with her mind spinning. Whatever happens, protect the child. What child? Was Iaronke talking about a memory, a metaphor, or an actual living child somewhere in Lagos who had something to do with all of this? She didn't sleep that night. She lay beside Kelechi, who slept peacefully, one arm draped over her waist, completely unaware that the woman next to him was quietly unraveling the biggest secret his family had ever kept. She stared at the ceiling and told herself the same thing over and over. 3 more days. The wedding is in 3 more days. Whatever this is, I need to know before I walk down that aisle. If you are half as tense as I am telling this story, imagine how Ogechi felt lying in that bed, and this is only the middle. It gets heavier. Before we go further, drop a quick subscribe if this story has its hooks in you already, because what Ogechi finds next changes absolutely everything. The next morning, Ogechi did something she never thought she would do. She hired a private investigator, a quiet, no-nonsense man named Basi that Nkem's cousin had used during a messy custody battle. She gave him one name, Ijeoma. She gave him one city to start with, Enugu, since that seemed to be where the Obiora's old family properties were, back before they consolidated everything in Lagos. She gave him 48 hours.
He came back in 30. What he found nearly broke her. Ijeoma had indeed existed, had dated Kelechi for almost 3 years, starting in the early 20s, long before he took over the family business, long before Beatrice decided her son needed a wife who matched the family's new status. She'd been a nursing student then, brilliant and ambitious, from a family with even less money than Ogechi's own. Basi found old university records and surviving photographs of a young Kelechi laughing with her at a campus event, his arm around her shoulders like she was the only person in the room. And then, 7 years ago, Ijeoma had vanished from Enugu completely. No forwarding address, no trace on social media, no record of her at any nursing institution or hospital in the state. She simply disappeared. The same year Kelechi's father had a stroke, and Beatrice took full control of the family's affairs. But Basi found one more thing. A hospital birth record, sealed under privacy protections he'd had to work hard to even glimpse, dated 6 months after Ijeoma's disappearance from Enugu, in a small private clinic 2 states away, in Onitsha. A baby girl. Mother's name on the record, Ijeoma Eze. Father's name on the record, left blank. Ogechi sat with that file in her lap for what felt like an hour, unable to move, unable to breathe properly. A baby girl, 7 years ago, which would make that child roughly the same age as the little girl she'd seen outside the boutique, standing beside a woman in a green wrapper who couldn't bring herself to walk closer. She called Nkem immediately,
hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. "Oge, breathe," Nkem said. "Just breathe. What do you want to do?" "I need to talk to him. Tonight. I can't marry a man I don't actually know." But here is where the story takes its first real turn, the one you didn't see coming. Ogechi never got the chance to confront Kelechi that night because that same evening, Beatrice Obiora called an emergency family dinner, insisting Ogechi attend, insisting it was wedding business that couldn't wait. Ogechi arrived at the Obiora's Ikoyi mansion with the investigator's file hidden in her handbag, fully intending to bring it up the moment she was alone with Kelechi. She never got the chance, because the moment she stepped into that dining room, she saw a face she recognized instantly. The woman from outside the boutique. The green wrapper was gone, replaced by a modest church dress, but the eyes were unmistakable. And she was sitting at the Obiora's dining table, hands folded tightly in her lap, looking like a woman being forced to attend her own execution. Beatrice stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, wearing an expression Ogechi had never seen on her before. Not the usual cool disdain, something closer to panic, badly hidden under authority. "Sit down, Ogechi," Beatrice said. "Since you've clearly been busy playing detective, I think it's time we all stop pretending. This is Ijeoma." Kelechi, standing near the window, turned around with visible confusion. "Mother, what is going on? Why is—" He stopped mid-sentence when his eyes landed on the woman at the table. His whole body went rigid, like he'd been struck. "Ijeoma," he said, barely above a whisper. "You are... I don't understand. Where have you been? Everyone said you..." "Everyone said what you were told to believe," Ijeoma said quietly, not looking at him, staring instead at her own hands. The room went absolutely silent. Ogechi stood frozen by the doorway, watching a scene she had spent days trying to piece together unfold in real time in front of her, faster and more brutally than she was ready for. "Somebody," Kelechi said, his voice shaking now, "needing to tell me what is happening right now." And Beatrice, cornered, finally spoke the words she had buried for 7 years. "I paid her to disappear," she said, flatly. No shame in her voice, only the exhaustion of someone finally setting down a weight they had carried too long. "She was not a trap," Ijeoma said, and for the first time her voice cracked with real fury. "I loved him. I never asked for money. I never asked for anything. Your mother came to my hostel while you were away for your internship, Kelechi, and told me my mother's hospital bills would disappear if I disappeared too. She told me if I refused, she would make sure I never worked as a nurse anywhere in this country. She showed me letters, contacts, threats that were not empty. I was 22 years old and terrified, and I had a baby coming, and my mother was dying in a hospital bed I couldn't afford. What was I supposed to do?" Kelechi's face had drained of all color. "You have a child," he said slowly, like the words physically hurt to say. "I have a child." "You have a daughter," Ijeoma said. "Her name is Zinachuku. She's 7 years old, and she's been asking me for 2 years why she doesn't have a father like the other children in her class." Ogechi, still standing by the door, finally found her voice. "Why now?" she asked quietly. "Why come forward now, after 7 years, 3 days before his wedding?" Ijeoma looked at her for the first time she'd entered the room, and something like an apology passed across her face. "I'm sick," she said simply. "Very sick. The doctors gave me a timeline I don't like to say out loud. I don't have 7 more years to protect a secret his mother built. I sent you those lilies. I called your office and lost my nerve the second you picked up. I stood outside that boutique meaning to tell you myself, to warn you before you married into a family that does things like this. I lost my courage every single time. I'm sorry. I've been losing my courage for 7 years." Kelechi sank into a chair like his legs had simply stopped working. "You knew," he said, turning to his mother, voice climbing towards something raw and dangerous. "All this time, you let me believe she abandoned me. You let me grieve a woman who was forced away by you. You let me build an entire life without knowing I had a daughter." "I did what was necessary," Beatrice said, though her voice had lost it earlier still. "I protected this family's name." "You destroyed a family," Kelechi said. My family, the one I never got to have. He turned to Ijeoma, voice dropping, softer now, almost pleading. Why didn't you find a way to reach me? Ijeoma's laugh came out bitter and short. I tried, Kelechi. I called your old number for months. It had already been changed. I went to your father's office once, 7 months pregnant, and your mother's driver turned me away at the gate before I reached the door. I wasn't fighting a person. I was fighting an entire machine built to protect one name. Eventually, I stopped because I had a daughter to keep alive. Enough, Beatrice said sharply, but her voice cracked slightly on the word, the first real fracture Ogechi had seen in her since they'd met. It's not enough, Kelechi said, standing now, taller than Ogechi had ever seen him stand, taller than the moment seemed to allow for. You don't get to say enough. You took 7 years from me, you took 7 years from her, you took 7 years from a child who is somewhere right now not knowing her own father exists. When is it going to be enough for you, mother, when you've decided every single person in this family's life for them?
Beatrice sat down slowly, the fight visibly draining out of her posture, though not entirely out of her eyes. I did it because I loved you, she said quietly. And for one strange moment, Ogechi almost believed she meant it, twisted as the shape of that love had turned out to be. Love doesn't erase people, mother, Kelechi said. Love doesn't pay a scared young woman to disappear and then let her son grieve a lie for 7 years. Ogechi stood in that room absorbing everything. The betrayal, the grief, the years stolen from a little girl who had a father the whole time and never knew it. And beneath all of it, something else settled quietly into her chest: understanding. This was the pattern she had sensed in Beatrice from their very first meeting. The calculated cruelty dressed up as protection. The willingness to erase whoever didn't fit the family's image. Beatrice hadn't just done this to Ijeoma 7 years ago. She had been doing smaller, quieter versions of it to Ogechi for 8 months, testing how much control she could exert, how much of Ogechi's own family she could quietly diminish at every dinner, every comment about her father, every reminder that she wouldn't fully understand the family's responsibilities. Ogechi had almost married into this, almost, without knowing the full shape of what she was marrying into. That night ended with Kelechi sitting on the floor of his mother's dining room, head in his hands, asking to see a photograph of his daughter, any photograph, while Ijeoma, exhausted and pale in a way that suddenly explained itself, pulled out her phone with trembling hands. Nobody discussed the wedding that night. There was too much wreckage to sort through first. Mama Grace flew in from Enugu the next morning, 2 days ahead of schedule, sensing something in her daughter's voice over the phone that she couldn't ignore from 300 kilometers away. She found Ogechi sitting in her bedroom floor, veil still in its box, untouched, surrounded by sitting charts she no longer had the heart to look at. "Talk to me," Mama Grace said, sitting down on the floor beside her, her knees creaking with the effort. "Not as your mother planning a wedding, as your mother who has buried a husband and knows something about choosing what kind of life to build out of wreckage." Ogechi told her everything. The note, the phone call, the boutique, Bassie's file, the dinner table, Beatrice's confession, Ijeoma's illness, the little girl named Zina who was somewhere in Lagos that very night, finally being told the truth about her own father for the first time in her 7 years of life. Mama Grace listened without interrupting once, her face unreadable in the dim bedroom light. When Ogechi finally finished, voice cracked from talking and crying in equal measure, her mother was quiet for a long moment. "Do you still love him?" she asked finally. "Yes," she whispered. "That's what makes it so hard." Loving a man was never the hard part, my daughter. Choosing what kind of family you build with that love, that is what takes courage. That woman is not your enemy.
That child is not a mistake to be managed, and your mother-in-law has shown you exactly who she is with her own mouth in front of witnesses. The question isn't whether you love Kelechi, it's whether you're willing to spend your life watching him choose between loving you honestly and obeying his mother quietly. You have 2 days. Decide with your eyes open, not your heart alone. Ogechi did not sleep much over those 2 days. But when the third day arrived, when the church filled with 300 guests and white lilies that thankfully bore no resemblance to the funeral bouquet from weeks earlier, she walked down that aisle with her mother's words sitting quietly at the center of her chest, ready, whichever way the day decided to break. Which brings us back to where we started, the wedding day, 3 days later. Here's the part nobody expected, the part that turns this whole story on its head. Kelechi had begged Ogechi not to cancel the wedding. He swore he wanted to marry her, that finding out about Zina didn't change his love for her, that he intended to bring his daughter into their new family properly, with time, with care, once the dust had settled. Once the day was over. Beatrice, terrified for a public scandal now that Ijeoma had surfaced, insisted the wedding proceed as planned, on schedule, as if nothing had happened, promising that the girl's situation would be handled quietly afterwards. Ogechi, against every instinct screaming in her chest, agreed to go through with the wedding date, partly because she loved him, partly, if she was honest with herself, because 300 guests were already arriving, because cancelling felt like a level of chaos she wasn't ready to unleash on her own mother, who had traveled all the way from Enugu for this day. She told herself she would talk to Kelechi properly after the ceremony, once they were husband and wife, once they had privacy to build a real plan for Zina together. What Ogechi did not know, what nobody in that church knew, was that Ijeoma had made a decision of her own that night before. Weak, running out of time, and terrified that Beatrice would find a way to quietly erase her daughter's claim to her father, the same way she'd erased Ijeoma 7 years earlier, Ijeoma made a choice no one saw coming. She told Zina the truth, all of it, and she told her exactly where to find her father and exactly what to say if she got scared. If anyone tries to stop you, Ijeoma told her daughter that morning, hands cupping her little girl's face, you run to the front, you find the bride, you tell her what I told you. A child's voice, my love, is the one voice nobody in that family will be able to silence. Which is exactly why 3 seconds before Ogechi became Mrs. Obiora, a barefoot little girl came running down the aisle of a church full of strangers, gripped the bride's dress with both small hands, and whispered 5 words that stopped a wedding and cracked open 7 years of buried truth in front of everyone who mattered. Now, back in that frozen moment, with the whole church holding its breath, Ogechi looked down at Zina, then up at Kelechi, whose face had gone the color of the whitewashed church walls. Beatrice, seated in the front pew, had risen halfway out of her seat, her mouth already forming the beginning of some smooth explanation for the guests, some story about a confused child, a mistaken identity, anything to keep the machine of respectability running. But Ogechi did something nobody in that church expected, least of all Beatrice. She knelt down, right there at the altar, wedding dress pooling around her on the marble floor, and looked directly into Zina's frightened eyes. "What's your name?" she asked gently. "Zina," the little girl whispered. "Zina," Ogechi repeated, and something in her chest broke and rebuilt itself at the exact same moment. "I know your mommy. I know her name is Ijeoma, and I promise you, nothing bad is going to happen to you today, okay?" Zina nodded, tears finally spilling over, and Ogechi pulled her into her arms right there in front of the entire congregation, in front of cameras that were absolutely still recording, in front of a groom who hadn't moved an inch since her daughter appeared. Then Ogechi stood up, turned to face Kelechi, and asked the question that mattered more than any vow written into the ceremony. "Did you know she was coming today?" "No," Kelechi said, voice breaking, I swear to you, Oge, I had no idea. I told Ijeoma we needed time. I never imagined she'd...
She's dying, Kelechi, Ogechi said quietly, quiet enough that only he and the pastor could fully hear. She doesn't have time. That's exactly why she sent her. The church had erupted into whispers by now. 300 guests trying to understand what they were witnessing. Phones raised, aunties fanning themselves, Beatrice frozen mid-rise from her pew like a woman caught between two impossible choices: damage control or dignity. In the second row, Mama Grace had risen halfway out of her seat too, one hand pressed to her chest, watching her daughter kneel on the marble floor in a wedding dress that cost more than a year of fabric sales. And for a moment, her face carried pure fear, the fear of a mother watching her child's carefully built future crumble in public. But as she watched the steadiness in Ogechi's shoulders, that fear slowly softened into something else. Recognition, maybe. Pride, arriving early before she even understood exactly what she was proud of yet. Ogechi turned to face the crowd, still holding Zina's small hand in hers, and spoke loud enough for every single row to hear. I am not going to stand up here and pretend everything is fine, because it isn't. 7 years ago, this family paid a woman to disappear because she was poor and inconvenient. She gave birth to this little girl alone, with no support, and has spent 7 years raising her in silence to protect people who never once protected her. I found out 3 days ago. I've spent 3 days deciding if I could still walk down this aisle. I finally have my answer. Beatrice, finally finding her voice, hissed from the front pew, Ogechi, this is not the place. With respect, Ma, Ogechi said, turning to her, voice steady. You don't get to tell me where the right place is. Not after what you did in that dining room. Not after what you did to a scared 22-year-old girl 7 years ago. This is exactly the place, in front of everyone who came to watch a lie get sealed into a marriage. Kelechi stepped forward then, and for the first time since the church doors burst open, he spoke. I want to be her father, he said, kneeling down slowly in front of his own daughter, his 3-piece wedding suit crumbling against the marble floor, tears he wasn't trying to hide anymore running freely down his face. Zina looked at him with the cautious, searching eyes of a child who has been let down before, even indirectly, even through a mother's careful silence. Mommy says you didn't know, she said quietly. Is that true? It's true. If I had known, nothing on this earth would have kept me away from you. The church was silent except for scattered sniffling from the pews, someone's auntie openly weeping into a handkerchief, and Osha standing frozen at the back doors with his mouth still hanging open. Ogechi looked at the two of them, father and daughter meeting properly for the first time, and something inside her settled into a decision she realized she'd actually made 3 days ago, the moment she read that hospital record in Bassie's file and had simply been too afraid to admit out loud. She turned to the pastor. I am not marrying him today, she said, loud enough for the guests to hear, gentle enough that it wasn't cruel. Not because I don't love him, I do, but because a wedding built on a foundation somebody else poisoned isn't a beginning worth having yet. Kelechi needs to be a father before he can properly be a husband. Zina needs a father who chose her with his whole heart, not one distracted by wedding guests and sitting chats on the very day he's meeting her. And honestly, I need time to grieve the fact that I almost married into a family that would erase a child to protect its own reputation. A murmur rolled through the pews, some guests already rising to leave, others frozen in place, unwilling to miss 1 second of what was unfolding. She looked at Kelechi, whose face was a mixture of devastation, and underneath it, something that looked almost like relief, like a man finally allowed to breathe after years of holding something in. Do you mean that? Kelechi asked quietly, stepping closer, Zina's small hand still in his. A pause, not an ending. I mean it, but I need to see it, Kelechi, not hear it. I need to watch you choose her every single day when there's no audience left to perform for. This is not goodbye, Ogechi said softly, just to him now. This is a pause. fix what needs fixing, be the father she needed 7 years ago, right now, today. Show me who you are when nobody's mother is controlling the outcome. And if what's between us is real, it will still be real in 6 months, without 300 guests watching and a florist bill hanging over our heads. Beatrice, watching her carefully constructed day collapse in real time, made one last attempt at control. "This is embarrassing," she snapped, rising fully now. "Ogechi, think about what you are throwing away. Do you know how many women would kill for this life?" Ogechi turned to her, calm now, the calm of someone who has stopped being afraid of a person's disapproval. "Ma, with respect, I don't want a life you built on someone else's suffering. I watched you sit at that dining table 3 nights ago and admit, without a shred of shame, that you paid a pregnant young woman to disappear. I don't want your money. I don't want your name. I want a family that doesn't have a little girl's tears as its foundation stone. So no, Ma, I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing not to build my house on a crack you created." The church, still stoned, watched Ogechi walk down the aisle not as a bride, but as a woman who had chosen her own dignity over an easier, prettier lie. She stopped beside Zina, who was still holding her father's hand, and knelt one more time. "You did something very brave today. Your mommy raised a strong girl." "Will I see you again?" Zina asked, small voice full of hope she probably didn't even understand yet. Ogechi smiled, the first real, unguarded smile she'd managed in 3 days. "I think you will," she said. "I have a feeling about it." If you're wondering what happened after that church emptied out, stay with me, because the ending isn't the one anyone in that room expected either. Kelechi moved out of his mother's mansion entirely, something Beatrice never imagined her son capable of doing. He rented a modest flat in Lekki, close enough to visit Ijoma and Zina every single day, learning in real time how to braid a 7-year-old hair badly, how to help with homework he barely remembered, how to sit beside a hospital bed and hold the hand of a woman his mother had once tried to erase from history. Ijeoma's illness turned out to be serious, but not as far along as her fear had convinced her. With treatment, Kelechi insisted on funding fully. Her prognosis improved steadily. She and Kelechi never rekindled the old romance. Too much time and pain had passed for that door to reopen. But they built something else instead. A careful, honest partnership rooted in giving Zina the stable life she deserved. Beatrice did not change overnight, and this story won't pretend she did. She stayed cold toward Ijeoma for a long time, resentful of the disruption to what she still privately called the plan. But even she could not ignore her granddaughter, and it was Zina in the end who cracked something loose in her, simply by wanting a grandmother, uncomplicated by the politics the adults around her had built. It wasn't forgiveness, it was a start. Ogechi took the space she'd asked for and used it well. She threw herself back into her business, kept in touch with Zina through small visits, and waited. Kelechi didn't rush her. He didn't call every day begging for another chance. He simply kept showing up for his daughter, kept building a life that didn't need his mother's approval to function, and let Ogechi decide, in her own time, whether the man rebuilding himself was one she wanted to walk toward again. 6 months later, Ogechi showed up unannounced at his flat on a Sunday afternoon. Zina answered the door and shouted over her shoulder, "Daddy, it's her, the one from the wedding." There was no big speech that day, no grand declaration, just Ogechi stepping into a small, cluttered flat that smelled like badly attempted jollof rice, watching a man who had rebuilt his entire understanding of family from the ground up, and finally, quietly, deciding she was ready. They married a full year after that first unfinished wedding, much smaller this time. No Ikoyi mansion, no 300 guests, no Beatrice-approved sitting chat. Just close family, Ijeoma seated proudly in the second row, healthier than she'd been in years, and right at the front of the aisle, scattering petals with the same fierce determination she'd once used to run down a different aisle entirely, was Zina, walking her father toward the wife who had once knelt at an altar and chosen the harder, truer thing. Beatrice attended too, seated quietly toward the back, without her usual entourage. She gave no speech, she arranged no sitting chart,
When Zina ran past her chair, laughing, Beatrice caught her hand for just a moment and said something too quiet for anyone nearby to hear. Whatever it was, Zina smiled and kept running. It wasn't forgiveness, not fully, not yet, but it was a woman finally choosing to be present instead of in control. And for a family built on 7 years of absence and secrets, presence was its own kind of miracle. Some love stories are ruined by secrets. This one was saved by a little girl brave enough to speak hers out loud. If this story moved you, even half as much as it moved me writing it, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button, because somewhere out there, someone needed to hear tonight that walking away from a beautiful lie is sometimes the bravest, most loving thing you can do for yourself and for the people who never asked to be hidden in the first place. I'll see you in the next story.